Okay, so you introduce yourself.
All right, I'm Jim Harper, and I'm welcoming my committee today. Hopefully we have Alab Mazumdar joining us from a distance, and then my other committee member who's here is Ligia Collado-Vides. Welcome. And then Mahadev Bhatt is not feeling well, so he's not here today. But did you want to say?
Yeah, well, something that I think is very important is to say where Jim comes from. So you are more from the journalism kind of work, and you are the work that he's doing is just fantastic in terms of bringing all his skills and now getting into a master's degree that is going to allow him to go into action, really, to try to bring analysis and awareness about how much we know in the coral reef area, how much the people, the stakeholders know of the coral reef services, and try to then have the vote to create a protected area. So I just want, to introduce those elements.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, trying very hard to think like a scientist. May not come naturally to me, but working on it. So I'm proposing this very broad question that I can't really answer with my research alone, but I think it's something worth thinking about and pursuing because I feel like a lot of environmental communications might be misguided by thinking that people are motivated by thinking globally, when I really don't think that's the case. But in my study, I'll be looking specifically at climate change, coral reefs, and a willingness to act in Southeast Florida. So this is actually my second master's degree. I have an MA in mass communication, go Gators, from the University of Florida. So I looked that up in the library from 1996. And that study, it was a qualitative study about how teenagers view the world through the lens of media, film and TV in particular at that time, before social media came through. So I'm definitely interested in global topics. And as Ligia mentioned, I have experience in environmental communications, journalism, as well as PR. And a couple of years ago, I was at the meeting of the Society for Environmental Journalists. And I met this guy from the Nature Conservancy, and then wrote this article based on what he told me, and it kind of shocked my system to hear directly someone saying to me that coral reefs were going to be going extinct within 100 years. And then moving more towards this year, I worked with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection on a communications campaign. It's an outreach campaign, which we branded Our Florida Reefs, to try to get people involved. And actually, I can give you some brochures about that if you're not familiar with it yet. So to me, this is somewhat of an inconceivable problem. Having grown up here in South Florida and enjoyed the coral reefs as a tourist, now finding out that they're threatened with extinction doesn't really make sense to me as a citizen. Here you see from the IUCN, they've now come up with the red list of ecosystems, just like they have the red list for species. And so they've rated the coral reef system of the entire Caribbean as endangered. And here you see a consensus statement from thousands of researchers who say that by 2100, the seas will reach temperatures and chemistry that has not occurred since the last reef crisis. That was 55 million years ago. So now within a human generation, we're looking at geological changes. So in my research, I'm looking at two questions. The first one is, how willing are people to pay? I'm saying willing to act, but really it's about this WTP, willing to pay metric that I'm looking at. And then secondly, does the global issue of climate change affect that willingness? So, like I mentioned, the reefs around the world are at very high risk. 75% of them are ranked as threatened, according to this consensus report, Reefs at Risk. And that's due to a combination of local and thermal stress. The thermal stress, global warming, and climate change is a more recent phenomena since 1998, when there was a mass bleaching event. That's really when awareness about that issue came to the forefront. A third of the stony corals that build the reefs are at risk of extinction, and this affects, hundreds of millions of people around the world, especially in poor countries. Here in South Florida, it's a little different. It's a wealthier, more developed area, but what's interesting here is the reefs are very popular, perhaps the most popular in the world. And here you see a chart of recreational boaters, and it's continuing to grow by leaps and bounds. So when you look at the physical science about corals and their stresses and what's affecting them, it gets very complicated. So I'm going to reduce it down to a simpler form and focus on these three main threats. And from the literature, you see that the climate change and related changes are rising to the top of the threats. Acidification and disease also are a part of this. Destructive fishing and land-based pollution. And so what happens is you see the transition from a coral-dominated state to an algae-dominated state, which then is what leads to the prediction that the system itself will disappear. So in terms of the social science, this slide is deliberately blank because I'm saying it's essentially missing in action the peer-reviewed science. There's plenty of great literature and plenty of studies out there that I'll be talking about some of them, but you know, NOAA and other authorities have recognized, you know, that we understand the physical science and the crisis, but the social side, we're way behind. So in my survey, I'm going to be looking at willingness to pay. What are the motivations that that are behind these payments? Climate change and reef issues, why do they seem to lack resonance with the public? And with stakeholders in particular who are fishermen and others who are invested. And one of my main ways of assessing that is going to be through a choice experiment. I'll talk about that more in a minute. So why this is important, because of tourism in our region. Our marine protected areas do not protect all the coral reefs in Florida. And there's a sore need for education on even very basic issues. So you may have heard of this study about global warming in the 6 Americas. So it's a useful way of thinking about how Americans think about climate change and global warming, ranging from alarmed down to dismissive. And then you can take these, and they tend to line up with belief systems, such as when do you think global warming will start to harm people? From there being harmed now down to never. And my survey will be asking a very similar question. I found these 2 studies about national attitudes about coral reefs from ImageJ research. And the key findings from here is that people who are engaged with the reefs and see them definitely have a higher concern level. But climate change is really disconnected from their concern, except for visitors and donors. And then there is a willingness, though. People do recognize that the reefs are in trouble, and they're willing to change their behaviors, such as seafood consumption, which is one of the things I'm going to be looking at. So as you can see here from this study, the majority are saying that, yeah, the reefs are only in fair to poor condition, but then when you ask them, have you heard about the effects of global warming on coral reefs? It's a large percentage who've heard not too much or nothing at all. And this was in 2007. When you ask them about willingness to pay, the majority are willing to pay something. 65% would pay more if they're going on a vacation in an area that has coral reefs. And then you can break that down by demographics, and that's something I'll be doing in my survey. I thought this question was interesting, so I'm going to replicate it as well. On a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means it does not describe you at all, and 10 means it describes you perfectly, how well does the word environmentalist describe you? And so the average was 6.3, very similar to the 6 Americas study at 57%. So here in Southeast Florida, where I'm focusing on the stakeholder population, this is a study from 2007 where they asked about their views on the reef resources in this area, just from Miami-Dade north. And in terms of the coral reefs, you see the highest scores for degradation. They recognize that this resource is worse than the fisheries and other resources that were asked about. And so they recognize that they're not in good shape. However, when you ask them about the indirect impacts, they tend to not talk about climate change. They talk about land-based sources. And then the lowest ranking here was global warming. And why is that? Why are people not making the connection when the science has established that there is this connection? There was a high non-response to this question. Maybe people just don't understand that there is this connection. And then maybe they're thinking that global warming is not a local impact, it's just global. So in my study, these are some of the research objectives. Looking at willingness to pay, I'll be asking how much are you willing to pay for 3 types of things. So the first is sustainable seafood, and if it's caught locally as well. The second is coastal management choices. And the third is a coral reef research fund. Would you be willing to pay a tax for that? And then when I do the analysis of the population, I'll be looking at the sample, looking at their fishing activity and other demographics. To continue, what on this question of how does the concern for climate change affect their willingness to pay, first they need to figure out what is their concern, so they have a series of questions about coral reefs, about climate change, and then how do these levels relate to willingness to pay? And then is there a gap, which has been seen in the literature, between awareness and concern, and then their willingness to act? So this is a table of a bunch of hypotheses where I think the sample will fall. And so I expect for the fishers to see a low level of concern about climate change, but a moderately high willingness to act. And so I'm expecting, hypothesizing that there is this disconnect. That on the other hand, though, when they have a high concern, which I do expect for local reefs, I might be able to find influence on their willingness to act. So the sample is a stratified sample, and it's divided into these 4 main categories. You see the main one are fishers, and that's because of their representation in the population. So the total sample that I have is about 2,800, and actually my survey, the questionnaire, was just sent out last week. So it's actively out there collecting data. So I'm not going to be sharing that today, but hopefully very soon I'll have some results. And these are 5 studies that I looked at in the area that were very similar, also focused on stakeholders. And in this Shivlani 2007 study, you can see that recreational fishing was by far the largest part of the sample because there's so many of them. And then down here, you notice for surfers, that was the only part of this methodology that used an internet-based survey, which is what mine is doing as well. So looking at that return rate, I estimate a little bit lower than that to figure out how many I would need to sample. So here's an example of one of the questions. We're not going to read it, don't worry. But it's asking them, would you pay a tax for a research fund? So you answer yes or no, and then a question after that asks about their certainty. So that's another metric to measure, how certain they are. So this online questionnaire was developed in Qualtrics. It has 5 sections about recreation and resources, reefs, coastal management, climate change, and then demographics. And then this choice modeling experiment is sort of the centerpiece of this questionnaire. So the respondent will be presented with 2 of these cards, and they'll be instructed what to do. You have to look down at so plan A, B, and C, you have to look down to see the 3 parts of it, the attributes, actually the 4 attributes, because at the bottom is a fee. It's asking, are you willing to pay this amount per month to get these qualities? So this is forcing people to make a multi-tiered decision, and hopefully it replicates more naturally the way people make decisions, not just whether I want to pay or not, but that there are many different aspects I need to consider when I'm going to pay for something. And this is looking at non-market benefits such as the size of the beach, water quality, and coral restoration. Based on random utility theory, I'll be conducting statistical analysis. And then these results can be integrated into figuring out, what is their willingness to pay. So, for example, a study in the Virgin Islands found that a household was willing to pay $48 per month to increase the reef quality from poor to good. So I have some similar amounts here. We're trying to figure out what is the amount that people are willing to pay. So some of the limitations about this would be that I'm looking only at the stakeholders, not necessarily the entire general public or population, and that the survey is only online, so it can only reach people by email. The fishing community has often been very resistant to this type of research or to the inference that they might be harming the reefs in some way. So that could be a confounding variable. And then there's a lack of basic knowledge. People may not want to respond, feeling that either they don't know enough or this just doesn't concern me. Many of the issues in the ocean, people feel like it's very far away from them. And then I consider this to be somewhat of a passive approach when the problem is really so huge. When we're looking at the extinction of an entire system, asking people if they're willing to pay $5 to help restore it, it's just not enough. But it's something. It's more than nothing. So with that, take your questions.
Great job. Have you done a pretest with your questionnaire, and do you know how long it takes an average person or fisher to complete it?
Yeah, it was taking them about 25 minutes, which I thought was too long, so it's down to about 15 minutes now, 15 to 20 minutes.
Are you offering any incentives to respondents, and are you doing follow-up?
I wish I had an incentive, but no, it's out of the goodness of their hearts. So I expect that my response will kind of skew older to people who have more time and are willing to spend that on a survey voluntarily.
On this kind of study, is there any way to verify whether what people say they would actually do? Like, if you came and said, put whatever money you want to pay in the can, that would be a crude way of verifying it, probably problematic. But how are they actually verifying the truth of what people are telling you?
Well, I think that's a limitation that it's very difficult to verify. Previous studies have come up with some estimations of how much people will pay, what kind of taxes they're willing to pay. There's actually pretty high support for, conserving coral reefs, but then when you ask about taxes, the concern can change. So I think the only way would be to do more direct interactions with people, to ask them, and then even asking them not enough. You need to take the money out of their wallet.
Right.
I'm not sure how you designed that experiment, but the choice experiment in here is trying to, trying to get them to think about it more holistically.
Are you specifically asking about willingness to pay a tax, or are you using less incendiary phrases for getting their money?
Yeah, I have 3 willingness to pay variables and based on questions. So one is about buying seafood. One is about that choice experiment, which is about management. And then the third one is about a research fund, which is called a tax. So yeah, I'll be able to compare and see, does that elicit different responses?
Maybe you mentioned this, but I didn't get it. So the survey is online on a particular website, or you're sending the survey to
it's being sent directly to email, and I didn't really get into the sample, but I constructed a stakeholder sample based on two main strata, which one are people that have fishing licenses, and the other one is a sample that I constructed based on a regional organization I worked with that are connected to stakeholders.
So it's basically targeted to people that have something to do with.
They have a connection already, yeah.
Okay, not to the general public kind of debate.
No, that's something I'm considering to add on later, maybe another, round of this study.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ramon is going to go next. And he's talking about how tree leaf characteristics change along a precipitation gradient, dramatic precipitation gradient in South Florida and also in Puerto Rico.
Hello all, my name is Ramon Salazar for those who don't know me. I'm going to be talking about my research proposal, my thesis research proposal, which is titled Leaf Functional Traits and Structure of West Indian Dry Forest and Precipitation Gradient. West Indian dry forests are what people know here as hardwood hammocks, which Josh and Skip Van Bloom, one of my advisors, have talked about that before to you guys. And I'm under the direction of Dr. Ross, Dr. Jay, Dr. Van Bloom, and Dr. Oberbauer. In this presentation, I will be giving you first an introduction to tropical dry forest ecosystems, their status and extent, an introduction to a forest structure and function, my research question related to that topic, my hypothesis, and my methodology. First, some climatic data from about where these dry forests occur. They occur mainly in frost-free areas, with a mean where they have trees have a mean annual barometric temperature of more than 17 Celsius degree, mean annual precipitation of 250 to 2,000 millimeters, and mean annual potential evapotranspiration exceeds precipitation. Some others classify tropical dry forests as one of the most threatened tropical terrestrial ecosystems in the world. 9% of these dry forests occurs in the 9% of the tropical dry forests, which is the one who occurs in the whole Americas, occurs here in the insular Caribbean. And let me talk about this unit. This 9% is a different phytogeographical unit. Now, tropical dry forests are classified as with 3 phytogeographical units. One is the Caribbean, one is Central America, and one is South America. So 9% is here in the insular Caribbean. And from this 9%, 70% occurs in Cuba. And as an example of how threatened they are in Puerto Rico, mature tropical dry forests have been diminished to less than 5% of their lineal extent. They're characterized by a short canopy from 2 to 15 meters, few canopy layers, a high density of stems. You can see here an example of my sites in Puerto Rico. And the citrus and evergreen species are the who grow there. This structure has been related to water limitation, seasonality, and duration seasonal and duration of the dry season. Nutrient limitation, which is where I'm going to focus, and natural anthropogenic disturbances that we have heard before in this seminar, includes hurricanes. So what we know about the structure is that trees have shown a positive relationship between gross primary productivity and soil moisture and depth, and soil moisture is determined by these factors: texture, depth, and parent material. These forests grow in shallow moldy soils on calcareous substrate, which makes a challenge for them to grow because this chemical precipitation occurs. Calcium binds to phosphates and makes them not available to the trees. And because of this, scientists think that these forests are limited by phosphorus. You can see here outcrops of the limestone where they grow. It's pretty, they almost don't have soil. So because of this, I expect precipitation will have an alleviating effect on trees' nutrient limitation because of the low dissolution, and they will make phosphorus more available. They will help separating that calcium phosphate to an available type of phosphorus that the trees can uptake. So what can we do to verify if precipitation is having an alleviating effect on the trees? We can look at the leaf functional traits, which can be used to study plant nutritional requirement and status. We can tell how they're growing. We can also tell plasticity capabilities of the trees and genetic differentiation. What we know about leaf traits from these forests is from Guanica, a site in Puerto Rico, and Key Largo, and they have shown to have a great high N2P ratio and are believed to be nutrient limited and highly efficient. And we also know that plant photosynthesis, respiration, and leader fall increases with soil moisture. So I asked myself, these are my research questions: do leaf traits vary across the precipitation gradient? If so, how do moisture and nutrient availability affect the leaf traits, which are SLA? That's a measure of area by dry mass of the leaf. Leaf nutrient concentrations, and N2P ratio, which is taken from the analysis of the leaf nutrient concentrations. And is leaf nutrient N2P ratio is correlated with forest structure within or across sites. And basically, when people ask me what I'm doing, this is the simplest way to explain it. Is looking if precipitation is having an effect on leaf traits, structure of the forest, and soil nutrient availability. My hypotheses are that there will be a significant variation in leaf traits across sites, and this will be related with the moisture availability. These look simple questions and hypotheses, but these have not been studied specifically in tropical dark forests. My second hypothesis is leaf N2P, the nutrient ratio, will decrease with increasing moisture availability, so there will be an alleviating effect on the nutrient status of the trees. And SLA, leaf nitrogen content, leaf phosphorus content, and forest productivity will increase with increasing moisture availability. How I'm going to test this? I picked 3 sites in Puerto Rico and 3 sites in Florida along a precipitation gradient. Here you can see low, intermediate. Oops, what I did here. Whatever. Well, I have some image. How do you here? Yeah. Okay, so these are my sites and their climatic data. This is showing the maps of the island. Here on the bottom left, you have the driest sides, Juanita, Puerto Rico on the south, and the other two sides are the north. Cambalache, the intermediate rain level, and Oaxaca, the highest level of rainfall. In Florida, I picked sites, 3 sites in the lower Keys, Nolan Key, Big Pine Key, and Sugarloaf. I took my other site with the intermediate level of rainfall is Key Largo, and the highest is 3 islands in Long Pine Key, in Everglades. This is an example of how the forest changes along the precipitation variance in my sites over there in Puerto Rico. You can see a higher density in the trees here in the forest, and maybe you can, I'm not sure. Yeah, here you can see the shorter canopy and here taller. So basically, what I'm asking is, do these two sites have different nutrient ratios? Is this structure related to water availability, or also their nutrient status increases along with the structure? This is a diagram a little bit complicated, but I'm taking 3, as I said, 3 ecoregions in each of the places, 3 sites per ecoregion, 3 individuals of each species, and 4 species. 4 species here in Florida and 3 species in Puerto Rico. Methopium doesn't occur in Puerto Rico. Well, they say that occurs, but it's very rarely to see it. And from this species, I'm taking, from these 3 individuals of each species, I'm taking 5 leaves per individual. And these leaves are going to be analyzed for a specific leaf area with ImageJ software. They're going to be analyzed for their nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and from these I will take the nutrient ratio, the NTP ratio. How I'm going to sample for my structure analysis, I'm taking basal area using variable plot sampling and a gauge, and 10 random canopy heights in each side. I'm going to take 3 subsamples of each side. This methodology, we're not still sure. I have to consult with the statistician and my lab researchers, because we said before that we were going to do a composite sample of the 3 samples taken in each side, but maybe now we're going to analyze them each. This will increase 18 by 3, it's a lot. My soil analysis, I will analyze for available nitrogen and phosphorus. This will be with the Seal Analytical IQG analyzer in Dr. Gates' lab. I'm going to also look for water holding capacity and soil depth. I'm taking 5 random measurements in each side of soil depth. And my statistical analysis, my objective is to test how 2 of the variables are, what is the relationship between the variables. So I'm going to do analysis of covariance and regression analysis. And basically this would be my X, my dependent factor, precipitation, and I'm going to compare related to my dependent variables, which are leaf trace, structure productivity, structure, and soil nutrient availability. With this, these are my reference, and I want to thank the USDA for my fellowship, the agroecology program, and Softail South Florida Terrestrial Ecosystems Lab and their team for all the help that they have provided to me. And I'm open to questions. Yes.
So you mentioned how the canopy increases or it's taller as you have more moisture available. Do you know what would happen to the leaf size?
To the what?
The leaf size, because you're looking at leaf trace.
To the leaf size?
So
I would expect to increase.
okay, and what about with the nitrogen and phosphorus?
I would expect that ratio to decrease, and that would mean that there's an alleviating effect on the trees and the nutrient status of the trees. But this has not been studied.
what are ecosites does the precipitation rate, is there like also an elevation gradient? as
There
well?
is. Yeah, you can see here. That's an interesting topic because maybe both locations don't behave the same because Florida is flat and very low elevation, and my sites in Puerto Rico, you can see the elevation here goes from 60 to 300 meters.
With your increasing precipitation?
What is it?
No, I was just like, never mind. Nothing, I thought it followed the precipitation too.
Yeah, there's also a little bit in temperature, which maybe we can take account later, but still have to do my analysis.
What sort of management implications would your research
Well, in case you want to grow these trees for a plantation, or also if you're doing sustainable forestry, if you try to do selective cuttings, you can choose where the trees grow faster or where they grow bigger, and yeah, decide where you can harvest better. And also for example, Josh and Lauren's study, which is related to wood rat, the structure, knowledge of the structure is important to know, and how this is related to the soil factors.
I'm just curious how you intend to collect Metopium toxiferum leaves other than.
Last weekend I was with my hands all red. First time I get it. First 5 sampling tries, I didn't get anything, but it seems like it develops later. And yeah, it was pretty bad. Now I'm taking very cautious, and also I'm grinding in the lab, so don't be around the lab. It gets to there. Yeah, have to wear long sleeve gloves, mask. Yeah.
You don't want to get it between your fingers. For sure.
No, it's awful.
It's pretty bad.
Okay, Ramon, thanks.